The air carried that heavy, sweet mix of salt and coconut oil, the kind that clings to your skin before you even reach the sand. We had just arrived at the resort, a postcard version of paradise, pale wooden villas, palms swaying in slow rhythm, the sea stretching out like glass. Mark, my husband, was already searching for Wi-Fi before we'd even unpacked. "Just one quick call," he said, fingers flying over his keyboard, eyes on the screen instead of the view. His voice blended into the hum of the ceiling fan, constant, predictable, distant. I stood on the balcony, letting the sunlight hit my face. Down below, the beach was alive, laughter, shouts, the smack of waves against boards. I felt like I was watching another world, one that didn't need an agenda or a calendar. I slipped on a light dress, took my camera, and left without saying anything. The sand burned pleasantly under my feet. Kids chased foam at the shore, couples posed for photos, and farther down, a group of surfers rode the morning waves. One of them drew my eyes immediately, tall, tan, his movements smooth and easy, like he was born inside the tide. When he laughed with another student, it was the kind of sound that made people turn their heads just to feel included. He noticed me watching. Not in a bold way, just a glance, a flash of recognition. He lifted his hand slightly, a half wave that said, "I see you too." I pretended to check my camera lens, heart beating faster than the surf behind him. When I finally walked back toward the hotel, the sun was high, and the air shimmered above the sand. Mark was still on his call, still pacing, still somewhere else. The smell of sea salt clung to me, stubborn, impossible to wash away. That night, lying beside him, I could still hear the waves, and see the stranger smile every time I closed my eyes. The morning rose thick with heat, the air already shimmering before the sun cleared the horizon. I woke to the quiet hum of the ceiling fan and the faint sound of waves rolling in. Mark was still asleep beside me, one arm stretched across the bed, the other reaching instinctively toward his phone. Even in paradise, his first thought was work. I slipped out of bed, pulled on a linen shirt, and stepped onto the balcony. Below, the beach was almost empty, just footprints fading at the edge of the tide and gulls picking through seaweed. Farther out, the surfers were already there. The same figure from yesterday stood balanced on his board, cutting through the waves like he belonged to them. I didn't plan on finding him again. But my feet led me there anyway. The sand was still cool from the night. I stopped where the water met the shore and watched. He noticed me before I could look away, jogged toward me with his board under his arm, droplets running down his chest. "You came back," he said, voice low and teasing. I laughed, trying not to stare. I didn't realize I needed permission. He smiled, slow, easy, sun-warmed. "You don't. But since you're here, I could show you how to stand on one of these." He tapped the edge of his board with a toe. I wanted to say no. Instead, I said, "Why not?" He introduced himself, Lucas, and led me to the shallow water. His hands were steady as he showed me where to place my feet, how to balance, how to read the rhythm of the sea. When I fell, he caught me by the wrist before I went under, laughter bubbling between us like a shared secret. "You're a fast learner," he said, still holding my hand. "Maybe I just have a good teacher." Something flickered in his eyes then, curiosity, interest, danger. The lesson lasted an hour, but it felt like a heartbeat. When we finally walked back toward the shore, I realized how close we were, his shoulder brushing mine, his breath sinking with the sound of the waves. Mark texted me while I was rinsing sand from my feet, "Meeting ran late. Lunch without me." Lucas saw the notification flash on my screen and didn't say a word. He just smiled, that same quiet, knowing smile, and said, "Tomorrow. Same time?" I should have said no. I should have. But the word that came out was yes. The next morning came with blinding sun and restless waves. The beach was already alive, children running with buckets, the smell of salt thick in the air, seagulls fighting over something invisible. I spotted Lucas before he saw me, helping a tourist to her feet after a fall, his laughter rolling like the tide itself. He looked different today, lighter somehow, as if the sea had washed the world off him overnight. When he turned and noticed me standing there, he grinned. "You came back," he said, echoing yesterday. "Of course," I answered. "I'm not done falling yet." He handed me a board, the surface warm from the sun. "Then let's see if you can stand this time." The water was cool against my legs, a shock that made me laugh. Lucas walked beside me, his shadow crossing mine, his voice steady and patient. He showed me where to look, how to breathe, how to move with the rhythm instead of fighting it. His hands were always close, not grabbing, but ready. Every time he steadied me by the arm, my chest tightened. Every time he let go, I wanted him not to. When I finally caught a small wave and stood for a second before falling, his cheer was loud enough to turn heads. "That was perfect," he called, running into the surf after me. I was laughing so hard I barely noticed when he lifted me by the waist, spinning me around like we were weightless. For a moment, we were. We stood in the water, still laughing, still close, both catching our breath. The sun glinted off his wet hair, a drop rolled from his neck down his chest. I followed it with my eyes before I could stop myself. He noticed. Neither of us looked away. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, voice lower now, "come earlier. Before the beach gets crowded." "Why?" He smiled. "Because mornings are better when they start with the right kind of wave." I walked back to the hotel barefoot, the sand clinging to my ankles. Mark was on a call again, words like budget, proposal, deadline filling the room. I nodded when he asked if I had fun, though I doubted he heard the answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. My skin still smelled like salt and sun, and every time I closed my eyes, I felt Lucas's hand steadying me again, as if the sea itself hadn't let me go. The sunrise came slow, spilling gold across the water, stretching thin shadows over the empty sand. I was already awake before Mark's alarm went off, lying still, waiting for the familiar sound of the keyboard. It didn't come. He was still asleep, face turned away from me, phone face down on the nightstand. I left quietly, barefoot, the corridor cool under my feet. Outside, the morning breeze carried salt and something sweet, the scent of sunscreen and coconut oil from the beach bar. The world was soft, half awake, and I wanted to be part of it before it got loud again. Lucas was already there, waxing his board, wet hair pulled back, sun catching on his skin. He smiled when he saw me, that easy, unforced smile that made everything else fade. "You're early," he said. "You told me mornings are better," I answered. He nodded. "They are. Less people, more truth." We walked toward the water, the sand still cold beneath us. He carried both boards under one arm and handed me mine like a secret. The waves rolled gentle and patient, as if waiting for us. He showed me how to angle the board, how to read the pull of the tide. His hands guided mine, his voice low, almost a whisper over the rush of the surf. When he moved behind me to correct my stance, his breath brushed my shoulder, light, careful, deliberate. My pulse thudded loud enough that I was sure he could hear it. I tried to focus on the sea. On balance. On anything but the warmth behind me. But when his fingers slid down my arm to steady my wrist, everything slowed. The sound of the waves dulled, the world shrank to the space between us, a heartbeat, a breath, a choice. "Lean forward," he murmured. "Trust the water." I did. And when the wave rose and lifted us, I felt his hand at my waist, keeping me upright, guiding me, holding me longer than he needed to. When I finally fell, we both went under, salt in my eyes, laughter on my lips. We surfaced close, closer than before, and didn't move. His gaze locked on mine, and the world fell quiet. "That's enough for today," he said, voice rough now. "Why?" He smiled faintly. "Because we already crossed something we can't undo." I didn't argue. I just stood there, the water swirling around us, his hand still at my waist. The sun climbed higher, painting the sea in gold, and for the first time I didn't feel like a guest at all. By noon the beach was full, umbrellas blooming across the sand, laughter spilling from every direction, children's voices tangled with the hiss of waves. I sat under a palm, book open but unread, eyes tracing the waterline until I found him. Lucas was out with a group of beginners again, patient and easy, the same warm grin he'd given me yesterday now turned toward someone else. I told myself I didn't care, that it was just another day, another lesson. But when he looked up and caught my eyes for the briefest second, the world narrowed to that single glance. He didn't wave this time. He didn't need to. Mark texted, "Lunch?" Finally free for a bit. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then I typed, "You go ahead." "Headache." He replied with a thumbs up emoji. That was all. I left the shade and walked toward the water, sandals dangling from my hand. The sand was hot, clinging to my skin. Lucas noticed me approaching and dismissed the group with a few words. One by one they carried their boards up the shore, leaving us with the sound of waves and wind. "You okay?" he asked. "I am now," I said, half smiling. We stood there, side by side, watching the sea breathe in and out. "It's strange," I said. "The tide looks different every hour, but it's always the same water." He glanced at me. "You talking about the ocean, or something else?" I laughed quietly. "Maybe both." He stepped closer then, close enough that his shadow fell across my feet. The breeze lifted strands of my hair, and he reached out without thinking, brushing them back. His fingers lingered a second too long. Someone shouted in the distance, breaking the spell. We both looked away, pretending to study the waves. "I'm giving sunset lessons later," he said finally. "Smaller waves, better light. You'd like it." "Maybe," I said. "If my headache gets better." He smiled, the corner of his mouth curving like a secret. "Hope it does." When I walked back to the hotel, the sun was starting to dip, staining everything in amber. Mark's laptop was open again. He looked up, distracted, and asked if I'd rested. I nodded. He didn't notice the salt still on my skin or the sand clinging to my ankle. Outside, the tide was rising, slow, patient, unstoppable. That evening, the horizon melted into gold and violet, and the sea turned to glass. Mark had ordered room service and was talking to a client on his headset, pacing the balcony with a drink in hand. I told him I was going for a walk before dinner. He nodded without looking up. The beach was quieter than usual, fewer people, softer laughter in the distance, music fading from a bar farther down the shore. The air felt warm and thick, glowing with the last light of the day. Lucas was there, as he said he'd be, sitting on the sand, board stuck upright beside him like a flag in conquered territory. "You made it," he said, standing. "I told you my headache might pass." He grinned. Miracle recovery. We walked along the edge of the water, waves curling around our ankles. The light stretched long and slow, turning everything amber. He carried the board in one hand, gesturing toward the sea with the other. "The evening tide's calmer," he said. "It listens better." He showed me again how to balance, how to breathe with the water's rhythm. His voice was soft, lower than before, like it belonged to this hour alone. When I lost balance, he caught my wrist, his fingers firm, skin warm from the sun. He didn't let go immediately. For a moment, it was only the sound of water and the low hum of the world ending in color. "I think I get it now," I said quietly. "The trick to balance." "Do you?" he asked, stepping closer. "Because you still look like you're about to fall." I smiled, shaking my head, but he was right. The ground beneath me, the sand, the surf, the certainty of my life, felt less solid than ever. When I stumbled again, his hands found my waist, steadying me. This time neither of us moved away. We just stood there, breathing the same air, faces inches apart. His eyes caught the last trace of sunlight, and for one suspended second, it felt like the whole world was waiting for what came next. The wave rolled in, cool and gentle, circling our legs like silk. He whispered, "You're getting better." "Maybe I just needed the right teacher," I said. He smiled, but there was nothing playful in it anymore, only quiet understanding. When the sun finally disappeared, we were still standing there, drenched in the faint glow of twilight, pretending the lesson wasn't already over. That night the wind picked up, not enough for a storm, but enough to make the curtains breathe like lungs. The waves outside grew louder, crashing in uneven rhythm, restless and close. Mark was asleep beside me, the glow from his laptop still blinking on the nightstand. I lay there listening, my body heavy but my mind wide awake. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the color of the water at sunset, the curve of Lucas's smile, the way his hands had lingered when the tide came in. The air still smelled faintly of salt and his skin, like warmth that hadn't quite left. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Mark, and stepped onto the balcony. The beach was nearly invisible under the dark, just a shimmer of moonlight tracing the waves. But down the shore, near the surf shack, I saw movement, a small light, the soft glow of a lantern swinging. Lucas. He was packing the boards, probably locking up before the wind grew stronger. I watched him for a moment, unseen, until he turned toward the hotel, as if sensing it. Even from that distance, I felt it, that recognition, that silent pull between two people who'd already crossed the line in their minds. I didn't move. Neither did he. After a long moment, he lifted his hand, slow, small, not quite a wave, just a quiet "I know you're there." I stood there frozen, the wind pushing against my nightdress, heart thudding against my ribs. When the lantern light flickered out, I stayed there, staring at the spot where he'd stood. The storm never came that night. But something inside me did, a realization that what was happening wasn't an accident anymore. It wasn't curiosity, or loneliness, or a fleeting escape. It was a slow surrender, like the tide itself, inevitable, patient, and stronger than I wanted to admit. When I finally went back inside, Mark shifted in his sleep, mumbling something about an early meeting. I lay beside him, eyes open, listening to the sea whisper outside. And somewhere beyond the sound of waves, I swore I could still hear Lucas's voice, low, calm, and close, saying, "You're about to fall. Don't fight it." The next morning, the world looked freshly made. The sea was calm again, stretched flat and silver beneath the rising sun. I slipped from bed before Mark stirred, careful not to wake him. His laptop light blinked beside the bed like a tired heartbeat, still open to an unfinished spreadsheet. Down on the beach, the air was cool, the sand damp from the night tide. Lucas was there, waiting. He leaned against his board, hair wind-tousled, eyes soft with a kind of quiet that felt meant for me alone. "You're early," he said. "You said mornings are honest," I answered. He smiled, stepped closer. "Then let's not lie to it." We walked to the edge of the surf. The water lapped at our feet, cool and gentle. He knelt to adjust the leash on my ankle, his fingers brushing my skin, light as the foam on the sand. My breath caught, and he paused, looked up, eyes meeting mine. "Cold?" he asked, voice low. "Not really," I said. The first wave rose and broke softly around us. He moved behind me again, hands on my arms, guiding me through the motion, whispering directions near my ear. His breath touched my neck, warm against the sea breeze. "Breathe with it," he said. "Don't fight it." I tried. But the water wasn't what I was fighting. When the board tilted, he steadied me, hands tightening around my waist. The sea rocked beneath us, the horizon blurring. I turned, just slightly, just enough to see him, and for one suspended heartbeat we forgot what we were supposed to be doing. His forehead rested against mine. The world disappeared. The only sound left was the slow pull of the tide, moving in and out around us like it wanted to keep our secret. When the wave broke, we both fell, into water, into something deeper. The salt stung my lips, and when we surfaced, laughing and breathless, it wasn't from the fall. "Lesson over," he said quietly, still close enough for me to feel the warmth of his breath. "Not yet," I whispered back. We stayed there, half in the water, half in the light, not touching, not talking, but knowing. By the time I walked back to the hotel, the sun was high and Mark was gone. A note on the table said, "Meeting till late. Love you." I folded it once, twice, and set it aside. Then I stood by the window, watching the blue horizon, and whispered to no one in particular, "I think I already fell." That afternoon the air was heavy, thick with heat and salt. I told Mark I was going to swim before dinner. He didn't look up from his screen, just nodded, the words sure half mumbled, already fading behind the sound of typing. The beach was nearly empty, the tourists hiding from the sun. I walked toward the far end, where the palms bent low and the sound of the hotel disappeared behind the wind. Lucas was there, waist deep in the water, board floating beside him. When he saw me, he smiled like he'd been waiting. "Couldn't stay away," he said. "Maybe I needed one more lesson," I answered. He laughed, soft and quiet. "Then let's make it the last one." We paddled out farther than usual. The shore shrank behind us, the noise replaced by the steady pulse of the sea. The water glimmered gold, reflecting the late sun, and everything felt suspended, like the world had forgotten to move forward. He stopped, straddling the board, looking at me. "You trust me?" "I wouldn't be out here if I didn't." He reached for my hands, guiding them to the edge of his board. "Then don't think," he whispered. "Just let the wave take you." When it came, it lifted us both, slow at first, then faster, stronger, until the rush of it blurred sound and thought. We fell together, laughing, the water swallowing our voices. When I surfaced, he was there, close enough that our faces nearly touched. Salt burned my lips, the sunlight turning every drop on his skin to gold. He brushed a strand of hair from my cheek. His fingers lingered, hesitant, then certain. The distance between us dissolved. His mouth found mine, soft at first, then deeper, the sea rocking us gently as if it already knew. Everything else disappeared, the beach, the world, the rules we'd carried like heavy stones. There was only heat, salt, breath, the slow rhythm of the tide pulling us closer until even the horizon disappeared. When we finally pulled apart, the water around us shimmered pink with sunset. Neither of us spoke. The waves kept moving, small and endless, like the echo of something that refused to stop. I don't remember walking back to shore. Only the feeling that the ocean had taken something from me, and left something else behind. The next morning felt unreal, too still, too bright. The sea looked calm, innocent, as if the night before had been a dream it refused to remember. The salt still clung to my hair, my skin still warm where his hands had been. Mark was already up, dressed, packing his laptop bag. "They moved my meeting earlier," he said, not noticing the small tremor in my voice when I told him I'd stay by the water. He kissed my cheek, a quick, practiced motion, then left. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed sounded heavier than the waves outside. I stood on the balcony, staring at the horizon. The same ocean that had hidden us now looked so open it almost hurt. Down the beach, I could see Lucas, barefoot, carrying 2 boards under one arm. For a moment, he stopped and looked up toward the hotel. I froze. The distance between us was enormous, but I swear he knew exactly which balcony was mine. He lifted his hand, not a wave, just a quiet, steady gesture. A heartbeat later, he turned and walked toward the far rocks where the water broke hardest. I watched until he disappeared behind the glare. The day went on as if nothing had changed. I sat in the cafe with my sunglasses on, pretending to read. The waiter asked if my husband would be joining me. I said no. The words came too easily. In the afternoon, I went back to the sea. The tide was low, the sand hot enough to burn. The same spot where we had fallen the day before was now bare, the water pulled back, leaving only small shells and tangled seaweed, proof that something had happened here, even if no one else could see it. I stood there until the waves reached my ankles again, until the sea slowly reclaimed the mark of what we'd done. By sunset, everything looked untouched, like the ocean had decided to keep our secret. And maybe that was mercy. The following day came heavy with light. The curtains swayed in the wind, letting stripes of sun move lazily across the sheets. Mark was humming to himself, rolling shirts into neat folds, the kind of order he brought to every part of his life. "Last full day," he said, glancing at me. "Maybe we can do something together? Dinner by the pier?" I smiled automatically. Maybe. But my heart was already on the sand. When he left for another call, I changed into a light dress and walked down the long wooden stairs toward the beach. The air shimmered with heat, the sea smelled faintly of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Lucas was standing by the surf shack, coiling a line, skin bronzed deeper by the week. When he saw me, the corners of his mouth lifted, not a grin, not exactly a smile, more like recognition. "You came," he said. "I wanted to thank you," I answered. "For the lessons." He nodded, eyes on the horizon. "And did you learn?" I hesitated. "To stand. To fall. To breathe." He chuckled softly. "Then you learned everything that matters." For a while, we walked along the shore in silence. The tide rolled in gentle loops, brushing at our feet. Every few steps, our hands almost touched, never quite. "You're leaving tomorrow," he said after a long pause. "Yes." He kicked at the sand, watching the grains scatter. "The ocean will miss you." "I doubt that." "I won't," he said. Then, quieter, "because I already do." The words hung in the air, delicate and dangerous. I turned to look at him, but he wasn't smiling now. His expression was calm, almost peaceful, like he'd already accepted the truth we hadn't dared to speak aloud. The sea breeze lifted my hair, brushed it across his arm. He reached out, tucked a strand behind my ear. The gesture was simple, but it felt final, like a signature written in air. "If things were different," he began, then stopped. "They're not," I said. We stood there until the light shifted, until our shadows stretched thin and long over the sand. He picked up his board and slung it over his shoulder. "You should go before the tide rises," he said. I nodded, but didn't move. He started toward the water, pausing just once to look back. That single glance said everything we didn't, that some moments aren't meant to last, only to live once and echo forever. When I finally returned to the villa, Mark was on the balcony, talking about flights and meetings. The sound of his voice felt far away, like another language I'd forgotten how to speak. I went to the bathroom, turned on the tap, and let the salt from my hair run down the drain. The mirror fogged from the heat, hiding my reflection. And for a second, I imagined the sea breathing on the other side of it, whispering goodbye in a language only Lucas and I could understand. The morning we were leaving felt unreal, as if the whole island was holding its breath. The light came in slow and gold through the open curtains, painting soft patterns across the bed. Mark was already up, moving through the room with the quiet efficiency of someone who never really arrived in the first place. He was on the phone, saying words like checkout, airport, schedule. The same words that had followed us everywhere, even here. I packed in silence, folding my dresses, brushing sand from between the seams. Each grain shimmered for a second before falling away. It felt wrong, somehow, to leave them behind. Like traces of another version of myself that only existed by the water. Mark leaned over to kiss my forehead. "You'll miss this place," he said absently. "I already do," I whispered, though he was no longer listening. When he went downstairs to pay the bill, I stepped onto the balcony one last time. The view looked almost too perfect, waves sliding in with lazy grace, the horizon wide and endless. The world had returned to its rhythm, pretending it hadn't seen what it shouldn't. And then, far down the beach, I saw him. Lucas. He was walking along the shoreline, board tucked under his arm, footprints fading behind him as the tide followed. The wind caught his hair, the sun caught his skin. Even from here, I could feel it, that same quiet pull, the gravity of something that had already happened and couldn't be undone. He stopped near the edge of the water, turned, and looked up toward the hotel. I didn't move. I didn't need to. His eyes found me anyway, even from that distance. For a heartbeat, the world held still. The sound of waves, the cries of gulls, even the wind itself seemed to hush. He lifted his hand, slow, subtle, not a wave, not a goodbye. Just a promise that neither of us would say out loud. I pressed my fingers lightly against the balcony rail, an answer too small to see but enough to feel. And then he turned back to the sea, walking deeper until the water reached his knees, his waist, his chest. The board floated beside him, and in another moment, he was gone, just another shape moving with the waves, swallowed by the same ocean that had hidden us before. I stood there until Mark called my name from inside. "Taxi's waiting," he said. "Coming," I replied, my voice caught somewhere between air and salt. As the car wound through the narrow road along the coast, I looked back one last time. The beach was already shrinking in the distance, the palm roofs, the bright umbrellas, the faint white line of surf. It all looked so small now, as if none of it had ever been real. Mark was talking about flights, about the week ahead, about how it'll be good to get back to normal. Normal. The word felt heavier than it used to. Outside, the sea stretched on, calm, endless, pretending nothing had changed. But I knew better. Somewhere beneath that smooth, glittering surface, it kept what we'd done, the sound of our laughter in the surf, the warmth of his hands, the taste of salt and sun. The sea forgets nothing. It just keeps moving, carrying secrets it will never tell.